It all starts with a tie, a black, clip-on tie, the kind you could buy at JCPenney for a few bucks in 1971. It was cheap, it was ordinary, and it was left behind on seat 18E of a Boeing 727 by a man who was anything but ordinary. A man who called himself Dan Cooper. We know him as D.B. Cooper. He was the man who hijacked a plane, demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes, and then jumped out the back into a freezing rainstorm over the forests of Washington state. He vanished. He became a legend, a folk hero, a ghost. For decades, the story was stuck there. It's a mystery with no body, no parachute, and very few clues. The FBI had sketches, eyewitness accounts of a quiet, calm man in a business suit, and not much else. The money that was found years later, rotting on a riverbank, only deepened the mystery. It didn't solve it, but there was the tie. The simple black clip-on tie he ripped off and left on his seat. For years, it was just another piece of evidence in a box. The FBI had checked it for fingerprints, of course. They found nothing useful. They likely analyzed it with the technology of the time, looking for hairs or fibers that could lead somewhere. It was a dead end. The tie was just a tie. It sat in an evidence locker, a silent witness to a perfect crime. And that's where it would have stayed. Except technology got better. Much better. What was invisible in 1971 became visible in the 2000s, and a group of citizen scientists, researchers working on their own time, asked the FBI if they could take a look. Not at the whole tie, but at the dust and particles trapped in its fibers over the decades. They wanted to see what secrets were hidden in the grime. One of these researchers was a man named Tom Kay. He wasn't a law enforcement officer, he was a paleontologist who specialized in using high-powered instruments to study fossils. He knew how to look at very small things and understand the big stories they told. He got permission to analyze the tie. He took the tie pin, the part that clips to the shirt, and put it under a powerful electron microscope. An electron microscope is not like the one you used in high school biology. It doesn't just magnify things, it bombards them with electrons. And by analyzing how those electrons bounce back, it can tell you exactly what something is made of. It can identify elements, it can tell you if a speck of dust is skin or pollen or something else entirely. Kay and his team began the painstaking process of examining thousands of tiny particles. Most of it was what you'd expect to find on a tie. Skin cells, stray hairs, bits of food, common dust. It was tedious work. For a long time they found nothing. It seemed the tie was just as ordinary as it looked. But then they found something. Several somethings actually. Tiny, microscopic flecks of metal. And not just any metal. They found particles of pure, unalloyed titanium. Now, titanium is not super rare today. It's in golf clubs, laptops, and medical implants. But in 1971, it was different. It was a high-tech, strategic metal. It was the stuff of spy planes and spacecraft. It was incredibly strong, lightweight, and resistant to heat. Working with it was difficult and expensive. You didn't just run into pure titanium on the street. It came from very specific industrial environments. Finding it on a cheap clip-on tie was strange. It was a clue. It was the first truly new piece of information in the Cooper case in over 30 years. But it got even more specific. The titanium wasn't alone, it was mixed with other even rarer elements. The microscope found particles of cerium and strontium sulfide. These are what are known as rare earth elements. They have very specific industrial uses. The combination of pure titanium and these particular rare earth elements was not a random mix. It was a fingerprint, not a human fingerprint, but an industrial one. It pointed to a very specific type of work, in a very specific type of place. So, the question changed. It was no longer, who was D.B. Cooper? It was, where on earth would a man get this specific cocktail of metals on his tie? The research team started digging. They looked into the industries of the 1960s and early 1970s. Where was this kind of work being done? The answer came back loud and clear: high-end aerospace. Specifically, it pointed to companies involved in developing very advanced aircraft or components. This wasn't a guy who worked at a normal machine shop or a car factory. The materials on his tie were from the cutting edge of metallurgical science at the time. The most famous and compelling connection was to Boeing. The hijacking happened in the Pacific Northwest, Boeing's home turf. And in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Boeing was working on a hugely ambitious project, the 2707, their Supersonic Transport, or SST. This was America's answer to the European Concorde. It was designed to be the biggest, fastest passenger plane in the world. And to handle the incredible speeds and high temperatures of supersonic flight, it needed to be built with a lot of titanium. Boeing was a world leader in titanium fabrication at the time. They were pushing the boundaries of what could be done with the metal. The researchers found that some of Boeing's plants, particularly those working on advanced projects, used titanium in very specific ways. One of the key facilities was Boeing's Kent, Washington Development Center. It was one of the places where the heavy-duty research and development for projects like the SST took place. This connection was huge. It suggested that Cooper wasn't just some random guy who boarded a plane in Portland. He might have been an employee or a contractor at one of the most advanced aerospace firms in the world, located right in the region where the crime occurred. But how would he get the particles on his tie? It's not like they were just sweeping up piles of titanium dust. The scientists looked deeper into the manufacturing processes of the era. They learned about a technique called sputtering. It's a high-tech process used to apply very thin coatings of metal onto other materials. Think of it like a microscopic spray paint gun that uses individual atoms. This was a process used in advanced electronics and manufacturing. Another possibility was the environment of a metallurgical lab, a place where scientists and engineers test new metals and alloys, where they cut them, polish them, and blast them to see how they perform. These activities would create fine metal dust, an aerosol of microscopic particles that would hang in the air and settle on everything: clothes, skin, hair, and yes, a clip-on tie. This detail is important. The particles weren't just sitting on the surface of the tie, they were embedded deep within the fibers. This meant it wasn't a case of casual, one-time contact. It suggested repeated exposure. It suggested the tie's owner worked in that environment. He breathed that air. He went to work there day after day. So the profile of D.B. Cooper began to change dramatically. He was no longer just a mysterious man in a suit. The particles painted a picture of him. He was likely an engineer, a metallurgist, a manager, or a high-level technician. He worked in a very specific and secure sector of the aerospace industry. He was not a blue-collar worker in the traditional sense. The kind of work that would expose him to these materials was sophisticated. It required intelligence and training. This was a man who understood technology. This might explain his calm demeanor on the plane, his knowledge of the 727's aft stairs, and his confidence in planning the jump. He was comfortable with complex systems. The investigation now had a direction. Instead of looking for anyone who might fit the vague physical description, you could now focus on a much smaller group of people. You could look at the employee rosters for specific Boeing plants in the late 1960s and early 1970s. You could search for managers and engineers who worked in titanium research and development. The massive haystack of potential suspects had been shrunk to a small, manageable bale. The citizen scientists didn't stop with Boeing. They also found a strong link to a company called Crucible Steel, which later became Remcrew. They were a major supplier of titanium to the aerospace industry, including Boeing. They had a research lab near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The team found that the specific chemical signature of the particles on the tie was a dead ringer for a particular titanium alloy that Remcrew was developing for Boeing's SST. It was a proprietary product. It was unique. This didn't necessarily contradict the Boeing theory, it refined it. Cooper could have been an engineer at Boeing who worked with Crucible's materials. Or he could have been an employee at Crucible itself, a metallurgist who worked on the very alloy found on his tie. Either way, the world of D.B. Cooper got smaller and more specific. He was one of a few hundred, or maybe a few thousand, people in the entire country who worked in this highly specialized field. Now we get to the core question: could this tiny metal fragment actually identify him? The answer is yes and no. It's not like DNA. You can't take a particle of titanium and match it to a single person. There is no national database of people's metal exposure. So, in a direct CSI kind of way, the answer is no. The particle itself does not contain Dan Cooper's name, but in an indirect investigative way, the answer is a powerful mabe. It does something almost as good. It creates a highly detailed, specific, and verifiable profile of the man. It tells you his profession, it tells you his industry, it tells you the exact time frame he was active in that industry. And it points to a handful of specific companies and locations. Think of it this way. If you found a rare type of sand on a suspect's shoe, it wouldn't tell you his name. But if that sand only exists on one specific beach in the entire world, you know exactly where he has been. The titanium on the tie is like that rare grain of sand. This new evidence forces us to reevaluate the old suspects. For years, the most popular suspects were men like Richard McCoy Jr., a Vietnam veteran and skyjacker who pulled off a similar crime a few months after Cooper. But did McCoy work in a high-tech metallurgical lab? No. His background doesn't fit the particle evidence at all. The same goes for many other longtime suspects. The tie evidence seems to clear most of them. They were in the wrong place, doing the wrong kind of work. The particle evidence doesn't just eliminate old suspects, it points toward new ones. It gives investigators a new set of criteria. Forget looking for paratroopers or disgruntled ex-cons. Look for a chemical engineer. Look for a plant manager at a titanium fabrication facility. Look for someone who left their job around 1971. Look for someone who fits the physical description and had a reason to need a lot of money fast. This is exactly what has happened. The particle evidence, while not providing a name, has given independent researchers and authors a powerful tool to sift through possibilities. It led one author, for instance, to focus on a man named Vince Peterson. Peterson was an engineer at Crucible Steel. He worked in the titanium division. He was by all accounts a brilliant man who was frustrated with his position in the company. He fit the age and general description. He was a thinker, a planner. The theory is that he felt the company had stolen his ideas and that the hijacking was a form of revenge or justice. Is Vince Peterson D.B. Cooper? We don't know for sure. But the point is, he would never have even been considered a suspect without the evidence from the tie. The particles on that cheap clip put him and men like him on the map. He fits the industrial fingerprint. There are, of course, counter-arguments. The tie is a major piece of evidence, but it's not foolproof. The biggest objection is the chain of custody. Cooper could have bought the tie at a secondhand store. The particles could belong to the tie's previous owner, not to Cooper himself. This is a valid concern. However, the tie was described as looking new, and the sheer number and variety of particles found suggests a consistent exposure, not just a random contact. Also, the tie was a cheap, disposable item. It's less likely to have been a hand-me-down than, say, an expensive suit jacket. Another argument is that the contamination could have happened somewhere else. Maybe Cooper sat next to a Boeing engineer on a bus. It's possible, but again, unlikely. The way the particles were embedded deep in the weave of the fabric suggests they settled there over time, in an environment saturated with them. A casual contact on the bus probably wouldn't do that. So where does this leave us? The titanium on the tie is the single most important piece of physical evidence in the D.B. Cooper case since the money was found in 1980. It's a game changer. It didn't solve the case overnight, but it fundamentally changed the nature of the investigation. It moved it from the realm of myth and speculation into the world of hard science. It tells us that D.B. Cooper was not some random tough guy. He was likely a professional, an insider in the very industry that built the plane he hijacked. He was smart, he was technical, and he was working with the most advanced materials of his day. He was, in a sense, a man of the future, using his knowledge of cutting-edge technology to commit a 19th century-style robbery. The FBI officially closed the active D.B. Cooper investigation in 2016. They decided their resources were better spent on other cases. They acknowledged the tie evidence, but felt it wasn't definitive enough to lead to a prosecution. To the FBI, the case is cold. But for Tom Kay and the other citizen scientists, the case is anything but. For them, the science continues. They are still analyzing particles, looking for other clues. They've found things like diatoms, which are microscopic algae. By identifying the specific species of diatom, they might be able to pinpoint where Cooper was living or working even more precisely. The story of the titanium on the tie is a remarkable one. It shows how an object that seems utterly insignificant can hold the key to a great mystery. It sat in a box for more than 30 years, waiting for technology to catch up to its. And when it finally did, it gave us the clearest picture we have ever had of the man who called himself Dan Cooper. Could a tiny metal fragment identify him? It hasn't given us his name. It hasn't led to an arrest. But it has told us who he was, what he did for a living, and where he worked. It has pointed a finger, not at one man, but at a very small and very specific group of men. The chances are high that D.B. Cooper's name is on an employee list from Boeing or Crucible Steel from around 1970. The fragment of titanium did not solve the crime, but it has made the ghost of D.B. Cooper a little more solid. It gave him a history, a profession, a place in the world. It suggests he wasn't a phantom who fell from the sky. He was a real person with a real job, and he left just enough of his world behind, embedded in the fibers of a cheap clip-on tie, that we might one day finally figure out his name. The search continues, not in the dark forests of Washington, but in the bright, revealing light of an electron microscope. The answer is still out there, not buried in the earth, but perhaps filed away in a company's old personnel records, waiting for the right person to connect the man to the metal.